blueprint lenders. Today we're talking to an exciting guest, Pandu, who's CDO and co-founder of Panakeia company, which is an innovative company in the field of cancer diagnosis. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, and let's start maybe with an icebreaker round just to warm up a bit. Who is your inspiration?
It's difficult. I'll put Marie Curie, the Polish French scientist. Yeah.
Nice. What Panakeia does in one word? Maybe two.
I would say cancer diagnostics is probably the closest that we're doing. Although biomarker profiling is slowly becoming a thing in the company. It's a bit deep, but we can go to that later.
Yeah, definitely. So let's chat about your childhood a bit.
Sure.
We know that you were placed in the gifted children school in Jakarta. Yeah.
Yes.
How was it for you? How was that experience?
It wasn't. It's very interesting because as a kid you thought, oh, I'm such a smart kid, etc. But but the more I think about it, the more I grow up, I hope I'm not that smart. I realize actually, if anything, it's actually ability to empathize with people, ability to understand, ability to influence. That's like the thing that moves things. Not oh, I'm such a smart guy, you're an idiot. That doesn't count. No.
Yeah, definitely. At some point you realize it's not just you in the world, right? It's like you with the world.
Yeah. If anything, you should actually be in positions to convince people who are better than you in whatever it is to sort of join your cause, because that's, in my opinion, how a company actually becomes successful.
I guess for you, what was that turning point that made you sort of transition that thinking and mindset, right? It does seem like there was a growth journey there, right? Of you sort of learned that lesson along the way.
Yeah, I think it's like natural growth of person, being mature or still a kid compared to a lot of people out there. But one thing I realized is you're only one person. I don't believe in this like one man game. I could work in, I guess 500 years ago when you're trying to solve something that is difficult. Da Vinci come with something. I mean, even he has his own workshop, right? They have people around him. So the bigger or the more we are kind of closer to the present or even to the future, there is no way that you can, as a single person, solve anything.
Yeah.
Even I would say, I have some math background. I know that for a fact that even math nowadays is highly collaborative. Right? There is nobody. I mean, there was some people, but there's like very far in between that can solve something that is difficult single-handedly. So at the end of the day, I firmly believe it's all about your ability to kind of like move. I won't say to move the populace, but move the people that you think can help you.
But sort of as co-founder and CEO though, right? Like it sort of is your show though, at the end of the day. So what is that role of leadership then, right? Yeah.
It's a bit hard, right? Because you look at founders, you kind of think, oh, there's this co-founder or something. You might think, oh, the person does everything. When in reality, is actually they're just like leading the people, right? Providing the vision, providing the guidance, providing the mission. Ensuring that actually the mission kind of like look back to you because people can be their perspective. Yeah. And that doesn't really get actually shown or depicted in a lot of, I guess, media, right? Social network.
Yeah. So you say like we idolize Zuckerberg.
Exactly.
Elon Musk of the world. Exactly. Too much.
In reality, we're just like, I wouldn't feel like, in reality, we're just like, kind of like, I wouldn't call ourselves glorified manager, but we're definitely like a manager that has a bit of, sort of like leadership capability, given that, I mean, if you look at the math or any sort of like calculus, why are you joining a startup? It doesn't really make sense in a lot of settings. It's all about the mission and conviction, but realistically, expected outcome, it's actually not that favorable. Let's say comparing to working at Google or something, right? Why would you join a startup? Because of the vision and that's like, I guess like what a founder job is really at the end of the day. You have to sort of create this conviction.
Yeah. So you basically are a sports bettor, right?
It is. I mean, compared to the people in crypto, definitely we're comparable. A bit more personal touch, I would say, but we're definitely in this sort of like conviction-based game.
Yeah. So let's talk a bit about your co-founder, the relationship you guys have, and how you came up with the idea. I was watching a video with her and she was referring to you as the mastermind behind the algorithm, and she was talking about how she experienced a scare in during her masters, I think it was, and that's what led to her realizing that there's a need in the market for more rapid diagnostics. So I think the current lead time, the lead time was, or currently still is, around a month, I think, around a month. And you guys have the ability to shorten that to 2 days or something. So that's a massive innovation. So maybe we can talk a bit about elaborating on that, how it came about, how you guys came together, and a bit about that.
Sure. So I think that as it is common in cancer, cancer area, or cancer research, cancer startup, cancer industry, there's always this personal call. Like my grandparents died of cancer. My mom is in cancer remission, breast cancer. My co-founder, she had personal experience, the same thing, she had families and friends who got through this journey, and there's definitely some personal calling, and so we happen to actually have done a lot of research in cancer. I came from math, computer science background. I did a lot of research in computer science, mathematics, slowly moving to ML in the last couple of years. A lot of them are embedded in the cancer. So when we met at Entrepreneur First, which is this accelerator program in London, we figure out actually, you've done this sort of research where she managed to correlate this sort of biomarker, which is something in your body that indicates certain characteristics, right? She could establish this correlation between this and certain cancer dynamics, which would influence how the cancer treatment affect the patient. So what I was doing is I was trying to understand how the morphology of the tissue, how the tissue looks like, can be actually used to the same end, in the sense that I can tell, given this configuration of the cancer in the tissue, there might be some sort of way that certain treatment would work better. So it's just keeping on that kind of quasi high level, we established that we have the same background, or just from different sort of perspective. We see that there's actually a lot of need in the area. What we did was, it's a bit start a systematic way of thinking about how to found a business. I know you probably hear this a business model canvas. So we did this comparable thing. Within an hour, we established, okay, this is the problem. Well, actually, we start with a solution, right? A research-based solution. This is a solution. Can we actually figure out any problem? It's not the way startup is supposed to be done, because startup usually start at answering a problem, right? But as it is quite common in the research with startup, it starts with this certain technology or solution that has potential to solve various problems, and you have to find a problem that you think is the best for this solution. And we just did this startup, the business model canvas within an hour. We figure out it is strong enough proposition. We move on with the program, pitch with investors, got some interest, got some tractions, and we closed our seed round. And I guess 1.5 years, here we are.
Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think that's two things that are really interesting about that, right? The first is that, you have this personal connection, right? Mm-hmm. And I think, if you read any advice about founders, you need to be passionate about the problem you're trying to solve, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's especially true, I guess, in medtech, in pharma, right? Is that a lot of people go into it because of that personal conviction, personal story. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a bonus. I would say that, it is definitely a boost in terms of morale and the purpose of the company. Startup, as I said, is all about the mission. This is something that, kind of resonates with a lot of people, kind of helping cancer. It is a big problem. It is definitely a very mentally taxing process, this whole cancer diagnosis, cancer journey. When I was a kid, I was wondering for months, because I saw this, the radiography scan of my mom's breast. It's what the hell is that? Nobody knows.
Yeah.
Of course, yeah, exactly. So of course, over time, I understood it wasn't that deadly as I thought, but there are some people who had worse experience, for example, and this is something that could happen to anyone. And for us, it's definitely a boost, because let's say comparing with a more abstract concept, or I'm going to work in certain interface within certain financial instrument or asset class, and I'm trying to optimize that, it doesn't really relate to people, while basically telling, imagine if you or your loved ones have gone through or are going through this process, instead of waiting for a couple of weeks, we can tell you within two days that what's going on. It's a really sort of a mental boost. Yeah.
And then I think the other thing that you mentioned interesting is that you said you found the idea through a different process from what typically is recommended, right? Because I guess normally you talk in EVC, they're like, yo, like you need to start with a problem, right? Then find product market fit, right? And you sort of went the opposite way, really, right?
Exactly.
You sort of, I guess, had the landscape figured out and figured out where you could add value, right?
Exactly.
So I guess like, why did that happen? And do you think it was actually like helpful for you to do that?
I guess like when I joined this EF, this accelerator program or incubator/accelerator program, I had like this sort of, I came with the ability to solve a lot of problems, and I've solved a lot of problems in the past from various industries. Of course, cancer being one of them in area, but I came with this idea I can solve a lot of problems, right? But then I realized actually, you know what, that this sort of like ability to solve problems can only go so far. You know, sometimes you have to. And this is, I think, what investor also appreciates, because there is this what I call a seasoned or a professional founders, right? Those who know, you know, I was a textbook, but a standard workflow of founding a startup is like, you know, you find an industry or problem that has low NPS, you kind of come up with a solution, or like come up with a prototype, you iterate until you find a sort of product market fit, and then you scale it up, right? It is like a very high level, but at the same time, you know, life is not as straightforward as that, right? Because you want to start somewhere, and for most people, it's not actually acting as if you founded like 5 companies and exited 3 of them, you know, 1 billion plus, right? You know, you start with something you're passionate about, and it so happens that for us, these areas where actually I was very passionate about. There's something that she was very passionate about. She spent a decade, you know, working in the area. I was spending 8-9 years in the area, so we know that this is what we are passionate about. In terms of like conviction around investors, definitely helps that, you know, like 2 decently qualified, I won't say very qualified, decently qualified people are tackling a difficult problem that is known to have, you know, let's say low NPS, that is known to be suboptimal, etc. Because if you have these options over another, let's say, set of founders, you would actually prefer this one. I mean, you know, the idea of a startup is, of course, there's a problem, but I believe, and a lot of people certainly believe, that it's about the founder's ability to kind of like iterate through the problem and solution sort of permutation.
Yeah. Well, I think the interesting thing about your approach to founding this company is a lot of times it seems this entrepreneurship is more of an art, but it seems you guys came with a very scientific, methodical approach to it. Sort of like, you know, what we hear about stories like, let's say with Amazon, it was like Bezos just saw this industry, e-commerce is growing, you know, thousands of %. I want to get on that, like mapping out a business model and then just getting in there. What excites me about that with you guys is that if that approach worked with what you're doing now, I'm curious about what other problems you may be looking at apart from, you know, this diagnostics. You know, that's really exciting. If you can apply that systematic model to that and it worked, what other things do you perhaps maybe have in store that you
even like outside the
outside of that? Is there anything else, or is that just you focusing on the core?
I have a lot of things, a lot of problems. I'm looking into, you know, like I've been looking into. Of course, cancer is a subset of what we call the senescence problem, right? In people aging, and as you age, a lot of like dynamics in your body that basically causes the body to slowly functioning even less and less optimal, right? So there are a lot of things I would like to tackle in that area. Climate is another one. I'm into agriculture to some reason, you know, like I want to become a farmer, but of course a scale-up farmer. But there are actually a lot of area that I think in the modern time, you know, sort of technology and, you know, new development can help to solve.
Yeah, and I guess at a more tactical level, right? You mentioned earlier that you're focusing more on biomarkers now, right? So there seems to be a strategic shift then, right? Yeah. And I guess in a startup where you have, you know, limited resources, how do you decide to focus, right? And like, what's that process like, right? Because you sort of have to put all your chips somewhere, and you have to allocate them, right?
Yeah. So this is, I think, where this sort of realm of theory, or this was like a scientific approach of startup kind of like starts. I was just stop, but you know, this is like where art kind of comes into play, because inherently, you know, being a startup by definition doesn't have as much resource. Of course, that becomes less and true nowadays because you know, all the big funding. But everything else being equal, a startup team has less resource than, you know, a big company or big tech team, right? At the same time, we work in this healthcare, which again, put another layer of complexity, right? There is like a human element.
Regulatory.
It's regulatory, ethics, morale, complexity of being a human, and of course there's population dynamics, etc. And it is difficult, of course, I had this interesting conversation with one of our PM candidates, right? We want to iterate very, very quickly, standard PM sort of handbook. At the same time, what people consider rapid iteration for us is 2 to 4 months project, right? It's not something that you can just mock something and then see if it works.
It's not like an app, right?
Exactly.
I'm getting on Tinder.
Exactly. You can just A/B test a scientific experiment.
Yeah.
You can to a certain degree, but definitely the cycle is way, way longer, right? Experimentation. And I think important for us is, of course, we need to appreciate that. And we need to actually communicate with investors, right? Or with our stakeholders. This is something that takes a lot of time, takes a lot of resource, takes a lot of patience. You cannot expect, a big blockbuster product within 1 year, God forbid, 2 years. Could be even more, there are devices that take 10 years to develop. Of course, once we hit that sweet spot, that would be, amazing and all the returns in the world.
So one thing that'd be interesting for reviewers is probably just estimated in medtech and pharma, what's that time to market and actually cost to market, right? Just to get a sense of scale.
I would say it depends. There's also depends definition of go to market, because people think, oh, let's build an app or build a device, put it in trial, that works, that is gonna be adopted.
Yeah.
The reality is you have to do this iteration, even the same sort of problem statement. Let's say you're developing a certain device that intervenes in certain parts of certain surgery, right? It's a very specific device. It's not something that you can actually play the UX. I mean, you can, but there is actually a very limited way of iterating. But even within this very specific use of the device, first you need, of course, to develop it. You need to validate it internally. You need to validate externally. There are various steps involved. If you can test it on certain animal model or certain rats, mouse, and things like that, you can actually always you need to start there, go a bit up the food chain, right? Yeah. You see it in a limited population, a standard population. And at one point you need to randomize the trial to some degrees. You need to see the statistical model.
Quite a lot of steps.
Exactly. You need to expand the trial to various countries and hospitals. So it's actually never. It's at the end of the day, it's actually never ending experiments. Even if the product is to market, you generally need to. There's a thing called vigilance or post-market surveillance.
Like pharmacovigilance.
Exactly. So right? You need to check that your product works after that, and that takes literally for as long as.
So that's really interesting though, right? Because that means that your investors have to be okay with that cycle, right?
Yes.
And I think that's an interesting thing for I think a lot of people trying to start a startup is they look for any investor they can find, right?
Yeah.
I guess what you're trying to say is that the fit of the investor to your mission is actually more important than the capital itself, right? Is that sort of the message?
Yeah, the fit. On a more low level thing, trying to understand the economics of the fund. Let's say one thing that we generally try to look into is what is the fund dynamics and economics, right? When did it close? Was it closed 7 years ago? You don't want to. For us, it's very risky to hop into a fund or get a fund on board that is less than 7 years old, because the LPs is limited investors, the investor who give the investors in money, right? They start expecting some return.
Yeah.
We want a fresh fund, right? And there's of course the experience of the partners. At the end of the day, the partner sits in the board. It is really hard. You have to really fit with the partner, because they are in the board. You cannot just say 6 months and I don't like the guy. Right?
Yeah.
That doesn't.
You're stuck with them.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. It is a marriage. It's the same way my co-founder and I are in sort of professional level marriage.
Yeah.
It is the same way with us and the investors.
So how do you think about that diligence though, right? Obviously the investor diligence you and do your due diligence.
Yes.
But you have to do the same to them as well. So what's that framework look like?
It depends. For us, we have a very specific in terms of a timeline, the past experience, the partners, the partners that are involved in the process, the partners' experience in the industry. Of course, mission statement. Second order due diligence from fellow funders, etc. Trying to read the news, of course, going through this resource like Crunchbase and the more expensive professional tool if possible.
Yeah.
Doing the math. I guess if I would say though, it is important to know that those sort of due diligence is possible if you have the choice, right? For most time as a founders, you don't really have the choice. You get that one fund that wants to give you a check.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
But definitely for us, it's especially important because this sort of like this thing might seem very mundane, but if you think about it, given that the time scale of the product development, the time scale of the validation, the time scale of the product to the market, the product to the market, the need, the sort of characteristic of product market fit, the capital cost of scaling that product, we need to know that. I mean, we need to actually have to tell this to investors. Sometimes it might be the case that some investors are not aware, but for us, we are lucky that our investors are very smart and appreciate this. But I know, for example, from other founders, you try to get this sort of generalist VCs with no experience, and they were expecting something else, and it turns out like Medtech is a very different industry than, let's say, a consumer app, right? So trying to just communicate these differences, I guess, is like what I think is most important.
Yeah.
If you cannot have a choice, then you have to tell them this is the dynamics. You still want to put money on the table. If you're fine, then that's good.
Yeah, that's some really good insight there, and maybe we could discuss a bit more about the funding process. So and maybe using your story as an example where we can, if we walk from, let's say, co-founding a company, and then how does it look from that point? So you found a co-founder, things are starting to grow, you've passed the point of friends and family financing or your own savings or whatnot. Where do you go next? Do you sort of go into a incubator? Is that the next step for people to do? And if so, how important is that step to get the right incubator? Because obviously, if you're looking for channels for funding, you want to make sure that, just like getting the right investors, you also want to be in the right incubator.
Yeah.
So how did you come across Entrepreneur first? Why did you join them? And then what was the process after that? Maybe through the series as it goes.
Yeah. So I think the start was less philosophical, because I just, at one point I thought, I want to do something else. I want to do something that I can, kind of like partially own. I don't want to just, keep returning values to shareholders without getting the values in return. So I decided actually to quit my job. I was basically managing research projects and products at the time. Quit the job, moved London to EF, because EF reached out to me at one point, and I was like, okay, London sounds good. I will live in Germany for as long as I can remember, in different sort of environment.
Oh, so you moved to London specifically for?
Oh yeah. I was just quit my job.
So they reached out. They reached out to you.
Yeah. They reached out to me out of the blue. I was looking at the website. Oh, that's kind of cool. It reminds me of YC, and I was like, okay, cool. This is time for me to move on.
Yeah,
move
that's
to London.
Huge shift.
Oh yeah, move. My stuffs are still in the storage room somewhere in Germany. I was put my stuff there, get two luggage, fly to London. Literally the first night I was in Piccadilly Circus, I took an Uber, and it was a stupid decision. You never take an Uber from Piccadilly Circus. So many streets. Oh, where are you? Literally just start a company. Join this accelerator, meet my co-founder.
In search of fame and glory.
I would say there was this element of wanting to be free. A quarterly life crisis element. And realization of I guess this is the point where I kind of at the same time start taking life less seriously. At the same time, trying to allow for more opportunity. And I just joined the accelerator, met my co-founder. In terms of journey, as you can imagine, I think I guess it depends, because there's a lot of ways on how to fund a company. For us, we call what we call a accelerator model, where basically a few very, very strong founders meet together, right? Figuring out a problem that the founders can solve. This is also important, right? I call it like a problem founders problem fit, because as much as we're qualified, exactly. As much as we're qualified, I don't think we should solve problems like in derivative markets. I mean, I know better at this point, but if I pitch about this, how would investor even?
It has to be within your area of expertise.
Exactly. You need to figure out the area that has a lot of problem, or there's a problem that you qualify to solve, or a set of area that you could qualify to solve. And for me, it happens to be ML, so I could technically solve a lot of problem. But at that point, I realized actually, cancer and ML is my strength, and my co-founder's cancer research, and we figure out we want to solve something on the area. Pitch, trying to figure out the business proposition, right? And problem, solution, proposition. Iterate, as much as possible in the short months possible. trying to get traction based on this sort of conversation. The funny thing is, like, it might seem ridiculous, but if you're trying to solve a problem that is there and people are actually, really having the problem, even if you don't have anything, they actually kind of like respond to you.
Yeah.
I mean, I myself actually, like, a lot of founders kind of pitch some some ideas to me or some solutions that happen to actually kind of touch on the problem we have internally. I know they don't have anything, but I like to actually just vent and
So if you get sort of that feedback, that means you hit upon something that people actually want, right?
Exactly. And then just like build traction. Of course, and there was a demo day where all the investors from, I guess, throughout Europe came, and my co-founder pitched there, talk with investor, go to IC investment committee, convince them to give us money, negotiate, close the round, hire people, etc.
But it sounds like the accelerator really provide that structure, right? Because like back in the day, you would have to be like, all right, like which investors do I know? Take out your pocketbook.
Exactly.
And now you don't have to.
Exactly. So it definitely gives it's a bit like, it acclimatizes us to this sort of like startup world or startup environment or ecosystem, because think about it, there aren't that many investors in London. I mean, London is definitely a big market for venture capital, but there aren't actually that many investors. On top of my head, I can list down like, let's say, 50 funds, and that cover pretty much all at least who's who in this like UK European market.
Yeah.
But then, as an outsider, it's hard for you actually to see, there are a lot of investors. Who do you know?
It's very like insular relationship.
Exactly.
You need that in.
Exactly. You need that sort of like knowledge, you need sort of introduction, the context, and that's definitely another model. Of course, like, one model. Another model is, you can just build a company, there's a problem, provide solution, get a lot of traction. I think a lot of companies in our time actually, if anything, most of the companies in our time actually were founded in this sort of model, right? Think about the hoping of the world, right? There's a big problem, good solution, got a lot of traction. I mean, investors come whenever you have you're showing like 500% growth year on year.
Why wouldn't they?
Nobody will say no to that.
Yeah, fair enough.
But sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah, I think one thing that's interesting, like I think you mentioned it a couple times, right, is that like in medtech, in sort of this space, right, there's a lot of like ethics, right?
Yes.
And you look, a lot of people look at big pharma, right, and they're like, oh no, like they're price gouging, they're profiting off of like the misery of others. So like, how do you think about that, right, from your company? Like, how do you make sure you stay on track from an ethics and vision point of view? But also, like, do you think that VC or this sort of, I guess, company venture model is the best way to move this forward?
It's a very interesting question. The way I see to it is, I mean, there is definitely certain values attached to certain, I mean, the way the healthcare works, like, I mean, at least my understanding, the way healthcare works, I'm not a clinician, but there's actually a certain condition and you actually intervene, and there is certain value or certain, I guess, complexity or overhead that's really to that intervention. It could be the cost, the time, etc. And then you have some outcome. And the idea is like, either you want to understand what happened in the baseline case where there is no intervention, or there's another intervention, a baseline intervention, and your intervention. And the idea is like you have to make sure that your intervention in this sort of scenario, kind of like, is not inferior. We call it non-inferiority, or like it's actually better than that one. So you can actually see it from value, from financial perspective. You save the treatment costs. You can see it from life perspective, right? You extend the timeline, the lifespan of the patient. You save lives. Pretty much the patient is cured. Yeah. Previously, they could die and things like that. And you basically try to work out the finance. Of course, it might seem ridiculous, but usually all this treatment actually bring a lot of value, right?
Yeah.
Extending 2 years, let's say, extending someone's lifespan by 2 years is actually massive, especially at the productive age. And what happens is, increasingly, I mean, it is not mainstream, but there's a thing called value-based healthcare. So basically, you're trying to attach certain value on certain intervention, and you basically capture part of it.
I guess what I think for people outside of healthcare, right, it seems kind of like almost weird to attach a number value to someone's life. Right.
Absolutely.
Right. So like, I guess one can talk more about that and sort of why is that sort of a thing you have to do, right?
Yeah, I think it's definitely, at least in my experience, how the things the way I perceived the problem or the space it's the space being very complex, right? There is no such thing. I mean, there are still, but pretty much in most situations, there is no such thing as you completely cure and that's it, right? It's more like you improve the outcome, you extend the lifetime of the patient, you make it less severe, you prevent certain percentage of death, like it's very incremental. And I think in this sort of perspective, knowing certain metrics really helps.
Yeah.
I think going back to, some people understand what A/B testing, this sort of thing, trying to attach certain value at the end of the day is important because we need at the end of the day we need to make sure that the treatment or like the intervention that is being introduced, like for example our product, is actually creating values, because why would you approve a device or an intervention that at the end of the day it performs worse, right? You want to actually maintain certain standard.
Yeah.
And I mean, sure, I'm definitely not a clinician, but basically there is this notion that this is the state of the art, this is the baseline, and any new intervention or any new sort of like way of kind of like improving the situation has to perform at least a bit better than that.
Yeah.
And then you can actually start. I mean, there's definitely there's this sort of like problem, this sort of dynamics that people would consider being an abuse of that system by basically, providing a bit of increment over something and taking a bit of that value out of that, and that basically might seem like a bit, I think it's like there's this capitalist component in that.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that, but I guess there's like, at the end of the day, I guess it sounds very, I don't know, like, at the end of the day, I have to say it's a very complex matter, and I myself, I'm not definitely qualified to say that.
Yeah.
But at least from my perspective, being in industry, trying to push our product to the market, there is sort of incrementalism, measuring your value, the value of the solution over the baseline, and trying to see that we actually deliver that sort of like increment and trying to capture that in one way or the other. That's pretty much the less exciting way of looking at how medtech basically.
Yeah, very like accounting focused.
It is definitely very accounting focused, economics, health economics, all the statistics, all the statistical modeling. It's not something that people, I want to solve. I want to help people.
Yeah, people are like, I want to look at spreadsheets all day. Like,
exactly. And I was like, at the end of the day, you'll wait for this, randomized trial. I mean, we're not there yet, but I can imagine a lot of founders in medtech literally wait for that result from multi-site clinical trial and hope that, the increment is there as they're going, FDA will approve that.
Yeah.
That's definitely something less
that
sexy.
That must be like nerve-wracking. Like you built up so many years of your life.
Yeah, I was thinking about, even in our day-to-day life, right? I don't know if you guys are doing that. I think for me, given that I'm working in the area, for example, whenever I read or like waiting for studies for a certain COVID vaccine, for example, I'm waiting for, I hope the result's good so we can use it.
Yeah.
And they just imagine how does it feel to people who are actually developing this, vaccine, having to wait, for 5 months looking for good results out of it.
Yeah, I think that's a good segue actually to our next section, right? Which is looking at the personal story of like risk, reward, pressure, leadership, etc.
So as an entrepreneur, what are the challenges that you faced from the day one of setting up your own company that you were not aware of before you actually started?
It's a very good question. I would say the human element. I think going back to the first session, it's all about human. The people you're trying to convince in terms of your vision, etc. That's like something I didn't realize. I thought it was just build something, ship it, etc. It's not as simple as that, and you have to consider all this basically preferences, not only from the customers and other stakeholders, but even from your team. It's at the end of the day, on the higher level, for example, we have 2 co-founders. At the end of the day, we have to agree upon a lot of things, and company structure, how is it being run, day-to-day business operations, etc. And that is something that I wasn't that aware of. Of course, the more low level it gets, the more actually it becomes intricate. And at the end of the day, it's just like, it's all communication and personal relationship at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all about the soft skills.
It is about the soft skills, absolutely. Yeah, it's basic communication, it's nothing else.
Are you hiring today? And if so, how can people apply?
We were hiring for several roles. There were I think 7. I just forgot how many people we have. It was changing, but we are in the process of closing our final role, which is tech lead. Might be finished by next week, but happy to receive any interest from people, for any sort of like interest, we generally quite open when it comes to people applying, just out of the blue, because there's always this sort of happenstance, like sort of good, I don't know, like some talents coming in.
What do you look for when you're hiring?
I would say it kind of changes over time. And I think in the same way that I appreciate more and more nowadays all about communication, I think communication skill, doesn't have to be someone with great, communication, like, oral communication skill who's good at, speaking in public, but someone who actually can appreciate this sort of human complexity, being able to understand that how is it on the other person's side, being appreciated of this, personal dynamics in basically every single thing. We increasingly look towards this, what we call like a Medtech ability, the ability to think about, to look at something and actually make some sort of like assessment on that, not only be in the situation, but go a bit one level higher. Just look at the situation, looking back at something, planning for something, thinking how we can improve something, just basically something that is meta. The more we think about it, the best sort of people we have so far are those people who actually can move a bit backward and look at the grand picture or bigger picture and make a better decision in the future. Yeah.
As for from the CDO perspective, do you think it's important for you to be involved in little processes, or you prefer to delegate these things to other people? Like how involved you should be?
So I'm not a CEO. My co-founder is I'm CTO.
CDO.
Yeah. In terms of like low level thing, this is also another thing. I used to want to be involved in a lot of things as it's coming. The general nature of a founder is those who want to build stuff or want to solve a problem, and there's an element of hands-onness on that. But I think this is like one thing that our advisor actually told us. We are paid, or we're being hired, or we are being retained, or as a founders, our job is not to finish a paperwork, review documents. I mean, once in a while it is our job, but for us it's more like thinking about the organization, figuring out what kind of culture we want from the company, figuring out the mission of the company, right? Hiring the best people for those jobs, basically filling the gaps in terms of ability in the company, and looking forward to a certain point, and basically kind of mapping back into okay, that's our target. What do we want? What do we need to do to achieve that sort of target? So a bit more high level. Unfortunately, a lot of meetings, but one of my OKR is actually to have increasingly more time for myself and my co-founder to think about the company, and I think that's like where our values or the return of investment per time invested is the highest.
So one interesting thing is sort of like for a lot of first-time managers and first-time founders, how do you learn to trust the team, and how do you learn to trust the results when you don't know the details at all, right? Or you don't have time to go to the details.
That's a very good, interesting question. I think it kind of evolves over time, right? I like to say that humans are pretty much Bayesian. Initially, you like to kind of see how the work is being done. As you see the performance, you adjust the performance of, let's say, someone who reports to you. To what degree do you need to sort of like control that work. That is like one thing. Another thing is, I think also, I would say motivating, but we have this sort of control system. Basically the idea is like there is an inherent level on to what extent do you want to control or manage someone's work. And it is actually pretty much two-way processes. I would assume certain state, and the report, like the report would then assume certain view, right, a certain level of ability. And our idea is that we would like to have this conversation, and based on, let's say, certain evidence from the last couple of weeks. Let's say, okay, just give an example, right? Let's say with our ML scientists. We have this sort of a work package or like a sub-role that is called ML research or foundational ML research. And basically we would kind of break it down into 5 levels, which basically governs how independent the person is. And based on the last sort of 101 and the evidence of the last couple of weeks or days, I think that person is at level 3, for example. And then the report will then kind of like say this, give their opinion based on my performance in the last couple of weeks and the last 101. I think at level 4 or even level 2. And then we're basically trying to triangulate this sort of thing. We agreed upon certain level that we know that both are comfortable with, and depending on the dynamics, we can either increase and decrease, and correspondingly, I would actually, review or check or sort of look at the work in a different sort of like intensity. So again, I think this is like more like communication and healthy communication, like knowing your limitation and ability is definitely, again, like it's a startup, there is nothing more important than communicating this sort of thing. I would say most of the problems, not only in startup but also in personal life, comes from miscommunication, misunderstanding, and
100%.
having this sort of level of view or level understanding is definitely what I think is very important.
So jumping back to cancer topic, there are around 300,000 cases in UK every year, which is like a huge number. And I was personally, I went through all of that when I was 16. I was diagnosed with cancer, and since then I've been thinking like, what is this ingredient that we're lacking to finally say that cancer problem is solved? Like, what do you think? What are we lacking?
That's a very, very profound question. I had this discussion with Sam earlier before the interview, and I think I personally believe out of I guess major diseases that we have right now, cancer is one of the things that I think we are very close, not uncuring, but more on understanding it on a level that is sufficient enough that we can stop it being a deadly disease. Of course, a lot of research is being done, a lot of investment is being done. I think not a oncologist or pathologist, but from the conversation, from my understanding of the area, is one of the most important thing in cancer is being able to detect early, having a better profiling, categories, trying to understand if this is the person's profile. Would that person fall into low category, middle category, high category of certain risk of certain cancer. There are a lot of like screening programs in pretty much developed countries nowadays. It keeps on adding. There is definitely a lot of overhead in terms of that, but I personally believe this is actually important. A lot of research are geared towards detecting it early or understanding it early before it starts being a deadly disease. I think that's like also my sort of view. Like the more we can understand the early onset of that disease, the more chance we have of it being able to a solvable problem.
I think that's so true, and if I look at a story in my life, my mother passed away from breast cancer a year ago, and if there was more early detection, like the stuff that you're working on, if she had found out earlier, it would have extended her life quite a lot. So I think it's really important what you're saying, really important what you guys are doing, and we're definitely hoping that you get all the funding and all the support and everything, and keep doing what you're doing, because clearly it's working, and it's a very important field, and we'll all be like supporting it as much as we can and rooting for you, rooting for you guys. Maybe in the last the closing of this interview, we can just summarize sort of 3 key points for those out there who are aspiring to be entrepreneurs or innovators or anything like that. Maybe 3 things that you would maybe that you wish your younger self knew. I know you've spoken a lot about like how important communication is, and persuasion, getting people on board to support the idea and getting people together.
So what is the blueprint of success?
Yeah, exactly.
Another very profound question. I wouldn't claim myself successful yet. Whenever I open TechCrunch or all these publications, like someone. I mean, I personally know a founder who studied with me in college, and that person is kind of getting to that billion level. So I'm not definitely. I would say if you want to start that, I would just say do it. Do it. There's an asterisk on that. It's definitely a high risk sort of activities. Control the risk. Know what you're getting into. Know when to stop. I wouldn't call it a gamble, but it's definitely a risk play. So you need to understand what is at stake. Know your sort of a running value. Like let's say your expense and things like that. Your retirement target. You shouldn't actually forget that being. Just put it at a second thought, you have to kind of consider this as part of your journey. I personally think being a founder is probably one of those, one of the best value to grow as a person. Nowadays, or actually generally, every couple of weeks I look back at my notes from last year, comparing it to another year. Basically, then looking back 1-2 years, I definitely have grown massively as a person. And this is something that emanates not only on the company, but as a person. I think that it would make me, if at one point I decided to return to the job market, being a normal, an employee of an employer, that would make me a more valuable employee.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Because a lot of companies want to hire people who have entrepreneurial skills. You want people who will grow the business and
have the drive.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that the downside isn't that large unless if you can cover costs, if you can save up.
Exactly.
I mean, even some people are worried about that employment gap or whatever, but I think that if I was hiring someone who had that gap and said, hey, I'll try to start a business, I'll be more inclined to hire that person because
it shows that hustle. It shows
that drive and entrepreneurial streak, not just painting in the lines. You can also create things and take a risk. And what would you say to someone, for instance, who's at that similar stage to you before you came to London? How would you advise them to take that leap? The leap where you're like, you know what, I'm leaving my job. I'm gonna do it. Because a lot of people watching this, I guarantee, are in that mindset. They want to do it, but they need that one thing to get them over the edge.
What do you need to believe, right? To
Yeah.
get yourself.
Or what do you need in order? What do you need? Or maybe you just need to do it. I don't know.
Yeah, I would say in a very, I guess, partially self-serving, partially strategic motive, I also have an exit plan. My plan, or one of my plans would be, now I'm in London, I could work in certain areas that wasn't available in Germany, for example, or have a means for you. Let's say if the things kind of go down, and to either start a new one or explore other area or have a backup plan. I think that's I call this term some sort of last resort sort of thing. Know what would happen if things just go south, and know when actually to stop again. I would say it's a bad thing that you have to stop, but at one point, the real life will call, right? You need to plan for your retirement, etc. And knowing this sort of thing beforehand, giving yourself target is also important. A lot of people that I think I was observing a lot of this sort of dynamics among friends and my network and people trying to be founder. Without necessarily a proper planning in terms of what is the milestone year 1, year 2, year 3, when do I quit, when do I move on to the next one, when do I move on to normal 9 to 6 job and things like that. I think knowing this sort of thing is important.
And then you also don't waste your time, I guess. If you have a plan and a deadline and
exactly. I think being honest to yourself is probably the most important advice. Know when. Just look at yourself. What do you want to achieve? Do you think that's reasonable? Would it actually be a value add for you over long term? That's actually it's like in everything in life, and I think as a founder, it's also a risk. A lot of founders, at least the one I know, who happen to be my friends and network. There's this the same characteristic that turns someone to a founder is some sort of, I would say denialism, but a healthy amount of skepticism at the same time. Healthy amount of, I would say denialism, healthy amount of positivity, around certain outcome. That sometimes also lead to this sort of a missing certain obvious points, right? For example, when to stop or what to do if nothing works.
It's the same with the betting,
People who are willing to go at all costs.
Yeah. I mean, definitely it's a risk game, all about the risk, control risk, manageable risk, that sort of the thing. I personally think that's what a founder should.
So have a risk management sort of.
Exactly. Put a framework in your head. If that's not working out, I'm gonna quit. Start a new one. The same thing. I guess in a day-to-day sort of finding that product market fit, you need to know when to change direction of the company. I think the same thing can be applied on a high level. When do you want to become a founder? What happened doesn't work out? When to move on to the next one and things like that.
Yeah, sort of that balance between sort of I'm motivated, I'm like 100%, persistent, I'm hustling, versus realistically.
Exactly. That's a very good analogy. Like know when to fire the cannon and know when to move on to when to change the target. I think that's like what for me is quite valuable.
On the point of persistence, there's that quote by Elon Musk that says starting a business is like eating glass and staring into the abyss. Would you agree with that, or would you think that?
It's definitely not it's not definitely an easy thing. In terms of hours, there are other jobs who that require longer hours. I mean, it's actually for me it's taxing on so many levels, right? The first one, of course, the financial situation or early stage company is not the best sort of like financial providers for you and your team, and of course there's a mental sort of requirements to be on all the time, at least in the beginning, right? This sort of like a bit higher level emotional attachment to the work. People say that a company or a startup is like your own kid. That could actually tangle someone very, very strongly, and that's like something that is hard to control emotionally. Of course, like the other commitment, like like the people that work with us, right? The more sometimes I think, for example, we have like some team members who have kids and things like that. That kind of like goes into your stress level. So definitely not the easiest one, and I think that's like another element, right? Managing stress level is definitely important.
How do you do that? How do you manage the pressure? Because it's a crazy amount of pressure that someone has to deal with. Everyone sees the bright side and the fun things, but that amount of pressure on someone is a lot to handle. And
you will see like a support group.
Meditation support groups. What does it take for you?
I'm part of various founders. Couldn't say that because of course it's confidential.
Secret groups.
I'm part of various support groups. Yes, it is absolutely important. There's the sort of stress level or the type of stress that a founder goes through is definitely a bit different than. I would say everyone has different sort of tastes of stress, but definitely it is my stress sort of. The thing I'm stressed about is comparable to, let's say, another founder's team.
And it's not just like partying like the social network all the time.
No. I would say, there's definitely an adrenaline element of that. People go in because of the kick. You got this big contract or you got this big partnership. You get this milestone. Kind of gives you this sort of like adrenaline kick. Also the expectation of things happening. There's definitely of that, but I guess in reality it's just like maintaining the stress level, maintaining the expectation, communicating that expectation is definitely important. Like to your co-founder, to the investor, to the employee, everyone. It's definitely very, very important. For me personally, I think just like thinking about this sort of like, a lot of stress happens because there is this lack of lack of options, right? So for me, just like thinking in the sense that as much as I'm stressed out about it, there's nothing much I can do. You just like have to kind of like muddle through or kind of like move on, try to make this happen. So don't really
control what you can, accept the rest.
Define the area you can control and work as hard as you can.
Just focus on that sphere.
Exactly, and then let the things take its own.
That's a great life lesson, even outside.
Exactly. Being a stoic in business.
Are there any books you want to recommend our viewers?
I think it's like Thinking Fast and Slow.
Great book.
Cool.
Buy it fast, read it slow.
It is a quite hefty book.
It is. You definitely want to read that slow. It's like
that's a great marketing technique.
that's the inside the book.
Really?
I think it's really important. As a co-founder, it's all about decision making. Understanding your brain. Again, I think one of the biggest lessons for me being a founder is actually learning how my brain works and necessarily changing to the way that I think is good for me and everyone else.
It's almost like there's a spiritual element to this as
well.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Sort of like you're going to the mountain and asking the oracle for advice.
It's like people call it the extremely expensive and time-consuming MBA. People call it extremely expensive and time-consuming. Meditation session. People say, but I think those statements are true to some degree, because this is like pretty much, you know, a life. I wouldn't call it life changing. I mean, people change all the time, but this is like personal development experience.
Yeah, it's sort of a lifestyle.
Yeah, one of the best thing you can get in terms of personal development. You know, looking at yourself every single day, all the interaction, all the mistakes you made, all the improvement you want to have, all the target. Yeah.
What do you think you'd be doing if you weren't doing this? So you had to change if you
after, before, or without.
Let's say if you didn't go to London.
It's like a counterfactual, I guess.
Yeah. What would you be doing instead? Do you think?
Sure. Maybe doing research.
Okay.
Research. Yeah.
Still research.
Although I think at one point I would do this because I've been, you know, longing for this sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
For a completely different reason, to be fair. You know, I was thinking, being an entrepreneur, being a founder, you know, in this sort of like the way people think about this sort of thing. You know, you build something, ship it, you know, make a lot of money again. But then actually, it's more subtle than that. It's more about, you know, it's actually it's basically a school for an adult.
Yeah.
And
So I guess like your reasons have evolved over time.
Exactly.
As well, right?
Yeah.
So do you think it's better for someone, let's say, who's an aspiring entrepreneur, do you think it's better for them to go and do an MBA, or do you think it's better for them to rather take that money and try and start a venture and learn, you know, the like from the school of hard knocks
Life
sort of
lessons,
approach? Yeah. What do you think would be better? I mean, I guess there's no optimal route.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I would personally prefer going the startup path because it is also fulfilling to some degrees. You know, there's less party, of course, but but it's definitely one of the. It is at the same time expensive time commitment. It's expensive, you know, mental commitment, but it is one of the what I would consider a higher return in terms of whatever you invest on.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think there's that theme of like the harder it is, the more effort you put in, the more returns and rewarding you get from it, right?
We're trying to raise money for some good cause and as a part of our project, and maybe there is any fund that you want to mention.
Oh, any charity you want.
Yeah, I mean, I think since we work in cancer research and like we kind of advancing knowledge as well, I mean personally, or I would actually prefer this sort of path. So maybe Cancer Research UK.
Cancer Research UK.
We partially also want some grant for them, so you
full disclosure.
disclosure.
Yeah. Well, I mean that's going to a good cause.
Yeah.
Like it's innovating in the field. So
yeah, I would call like going to that last couple of miles of cancer research is really important.
Well, that's inspiring. You know, it shows that something can be done about it, and it's within our lifetime. And I think
so.
You know,
and we can defeat the dragon eventually.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. It's been really great having you, and really inspiring guest. And we'll be watching and
awesome.
Yeah, we'll be hoping for success. We're all invested in it. But thank you. This has been wonderful.
Thank you very much.
You.